Hello everyone, good evening and welcome. My name is James Harding. I'm the editor and co-founder of Tortoise. And this evening we're going to do something which I don't think I've done before as a journalist, and I've been a journalist for 30 odd years, which is to take an investigation that we're working on and try to understand how we should best approach it. And if I sound a little sort of nervous or concerned about how to do that, it's because it's a story that is not just incredibly important and sensitive, but like all the most difficult stories, really complicated. And we're incredibly lucky that Nima Omer is joining us. She wrote a piece that caught our attention a couple of months ago on this case that asked the question, what happened to Shukri Abdi? And the truth is that we're beginning to know the questions here. We don't really know the answers. And so what we're hoping to do in the conversation that we start with Nemo is to begin to understand and piece together the life of Shukri Abdi, a 12-year-old girl who drowned and died in a river in Bury, but try and then take from that what we're learning about schools and bullying, immigration in the UK, the role of the police, the coroner's courts, and if you like, the institutions that are supposed to support someone through a trauma like this or engage with them, and who in this instance seem so far to have failed. We're also incredibly fortunate that Lauren Seeger-Smith has joined us. She's the CEO of Kidscape, and Lauren spent many, many years working with families, with children, with institutions, and trying to address the issue of bullying. So Lauren, thank you too for joining us. If you have never been to a ThinkIn before, then welcome. And also you're about to see us really give open journalism a go. The idea is that this is like a news meeting. Imagine that you'd walked into a newsroom and Nemo's the reporter, I'm the editor, and my job is to say, okay, what have you got? Kick the tires on what we know, check whether we're asking the right questions. But at the same time, everyone else in the news meeting is also supposed to be asking themselves, have we got this right? Is there an angle on this we're missing? So please do weigh in. Tell us what you think, what the context for this story could or should be. Also, we have a rule which is no questions in a ThinkIn. Well, in this case, what we do want is to know the questions we should be asking. So please do likewise join me in trying to understand what we so far do and don't know as regards Shukri Abdi, but what we need to know. So my colleague Liz Mosley, who is overseeing the chat, as the members editor here, is going to try and help us organize our thoughts. But I'm going to start, if I might, with you, Nemo. So why don't you start? Well, firstly, tell us about you and how you got involved in the telling of this story.
So I basically, it was actually quite serendipitous how I got involved with this case to begin with. I follow all the editors of Galdem on Twitter, and they were basically doing a call out where they were asking if there was any Somali journalists that were preferably Manchester based that could help, that could write a story that's quite confidential at that point. And I messaged the editor, I emailed her, and I did all the stuff that you're supposed to do, and that's just how I got involved with it. And they then told me about what the case was about and what they wanted to do and what like my role would be. And it was, I knew of the case. I heard about it when it first happened, and I was following it closely actually for months. So I was really happy that I would play such an important role in reporting the inquest. A lot of the reporting of the inquest was news-based, and I got to write a really big feature on it. So I was, I think I had a very specific role in kind of not just telling the public what was happening at the inquest specifically, but shaping and contextualizing the story to give it far more depth and complexity than I think was was being rewarded at that point in time.
So Nima, will you take us through it? So what do we know in terms of what happened?
So what we do know at the moment is Shukri was So Shukri was a refugee. She had come to the UK in 2017. She was located in Bury in Greater Manchester. Her family was settled there, her and her 5 siblings and her mother. And they basically, Shukri started, and she was in primary school for about 6 months. Then she started at the secondary school, Broad Oak, that has now been renamed to Hazelwood. And basically she was from all the people that I've spoken to so far, she was a bright and happy and chatty girl. She was also shy. There was a lot going on there. And the inquest basically was supposed to kind of basically tell the story of actually what happened from a girl who was supposedly scared of the water. She was scared of swimming. She didn't know how to swim. How she ended up at the bottom of a river. And what we know is that there was 4 other children there that day that cannot be named because they are children, and they cannot be like identified. They kind of started the day. She was at school, and from all intents and purposes, it seems like it was just a really random series of events that led to her being at the river that day, where her friends kind of suggested that they might do something after school, which was very uncommon for her. She came from quite something that I personally really relate to, like a very suspicious kind of family that, like, when I say suspicious, I mean like my mum, for example, like my parents are refugees as well. And she was very protective of us. And so we weren't really allowed out after school to kind of hang out with kids. And it was not common for her to hang out with kids after school, even if they were really good friends with her in school. And they made a plan in their maths lesson that day to go out. It was unclear what the plan was. I think that from what the inquest has told, Shukri was very, she was back and forth about it because she was very scared of, breaking rules. She wasn't really a rule breaker. In the end, she decided to go with them willingly, and there's a lot of like detail that was, that I won't really delve into at the moment about like how that actually came to happen. It was two of her friends, and then they met two other kids who that didn't really know, none of them really knew each other very well, and they made their way to the river, and only one child and Shukri actually fully got into the water. And it seemed that from all of the evidence that was given, that it happened incredibly quickly. One moment, everything was fine and she seemed to be enjoying herself. And then all of a sudden panic sets in and she was flailing in the water, and and one of the children started to move away from her, and everyone got all of the other kids' backs up and they were wondering what was going on in the water. And it was actually really harrowing to hear very traumatized children give evidence like this, because they were just recalling, her saying that we could hear her like screaming out, and then all of a sudden she wasn't saying anything. And one of them actually dived into the water to try and see if he could find her, and they couldn't. They alerted the authorities. They, tried to get other people to come into the water to find her. Unfortunately, none of that came to fruition, and it became a recovery mission. So
Nima, I'm just going to stop you for a moment so I understand the full timetable. So if I've got this right, this happens on June the 27th last year, 2019.
Yeah.
And in a piece that I read of yours, it was an extremely hot day.
Yeah.
And forgive me, I don't know the River Irwell. Is the River Irwell a very fast-moving river? Is it the kind of river you might sort of dangle your feet in? What kind of...
It was, I didn't know it very well either until this case. And it seems like there are different parts of the river where there are parts of it that's very shallow, and that, you can just kind of sit on the rocks, and that's what 3 of the kids did. But then there are very dangerous parts of the river that close to the weir, where the water is incredibly deep. Like it kind of is almost like it kind of almost falls off a cliff edge a little bit, and it gets very deep and very fast. Like, and if you're not a strong swimmer, even if you are a strong swimmer, it's very difficult to be able to, not like drown in that kind of situation.
Yeah. And Shukri Abdi couldn't swim, right?
No,
right?
she couldn't. No, she couldn't.
Right. So it was clear. It was that was the case. Well, I just want to pause and just so for the conversation for everyone. But part of the problem here, presumably, we've got is a practical one as well as a legal one. So we can't name or identify or do anything or say anything that might lead to the identification of the children that accompanied her, right? And yet, can I just understand something, Nemo? Because when I was reading up about this and reading around your reporting, there's quite a lot on social media that says elsewhere on social media that those other children are being named or identified. Is that the case?
Yes. So there has definitely been a lot of people who at the time got very involved with the case and have since, obviously, it's re-emerged as a really as a big case again, and people have, whether it's kids from the school who knew what had happened and knew who were involved and then kind of posted it immediately after everything had happened, so at that point it wasn't like illegal to do that, and there are also just people who kind of just wanted a scapegoat, they wanted someone to blame, and they've been circulating the names, but I haven't seen that recently. I haven't seen that lately.
All right. Well, let's try and address the things that if you like, we can discuss, because assuming that we can say, all right, Shukri Abdi died on the 27th of June 2019 in the company of these children, and we can't necessarily then explain or understand fully the circumstances which brought her to the river or exactly what happened at the river. What we can talk about, presumably, are three key institutions here: the police, the coroner's court, and the school. Is that a fair way of approaching it?
Yeah, 100%. Those are the three main institutions involved.
Okay, so let's start with the police. How did the police handle it?
So there are a few stages where the police were involved. So there was the night that Shukri drowned, where obviously the police were brought to the scene after one of the children called them, and then two of the other children went to Bury police station to bring police officers to the scene. So that was all happening, and then obviously the children were taken back to the police station. At that point, only two of the children were interviewed. Two of them were let go without having statements taken, which I found that very odd. And then effectively, they then went to tell the mother, Zamzam, that her daughter had died, unfortunately. And they, from the reporting that I've seen and from what I've read about it, the police were incredibly callous and like kind of.
We've just lost him over a moment. We're hoping to get her back shortly, James.
Thank you very much. I'm going to, Lauren, I'm going to sort of ask you to do things a little bit out. Oh, Nima, how did you do that? Are you back? Can we hear you?
I'm back. I don't know what just happened.
What you were doing was very intriguing. So you were getting to just at the moment where you were saying that there were two individuals that you said the police didn't speak to. Is that right? Yes.
So there were 4 kids who were there, and 2 of the children were interviewed. However, 2 of them were, and their statements were taken. However, 2 of them were kind of let go when their guardians came to collect them. And it was, I found that a very odd decision to make. And then after that, the big thing was the following days, which were kind of, I think everyone has kind of decided that it was very badly handled, whereby the police were quite quickly declared that it was nothing more than a tragic accident, and kind of...
Sorry, Nima, because I looked at the wording. They declared it a tragic incident.
Incident, sorry,
right?
Yeah.
And I'm really confused by that wording, right? I don't know what, and maybe you've looked at it, or maybe it's just a careful formulation, but do we know what a tragic incident is? Because it's not a tragic incident, it's a thing that happened that's tragic, which is indisputable, right?
Yes. I found it very odd language at the time when I first heard about it, and it happened very quickly. I'm not sure why they used that language. I haven't looked further into it, unfortunately, but to the best of my knowledge, they released a press release, and that was the language that they used, and the family were incredibly unhappy with that, especially since none of the answers that we have now, at that point, no one knew what had happened at all, and it seemed like the police were not doing their job in being rigorous and robust in their investigation into the death of a vulnerable person.
So, okay, so the police declared, so the questions about who they interviewed, there's a question too about the terminology and, if you like, the way in which they have declared it. Let's just keep going forward, and then we'll go back, if you like. Let's just go to the coroner's court, or the inquest. So I'm confused, Nima, did you cover the inquest, or were you reading off transcripts?
I covered the inquest. I was there for the full 5 days.
You were there in the room?
Yes.
Right. So this puts you in a particularly difficult position, because you saw, and just forgive me, I should probably know this, but in these circumstances, were the children given anonymity by a screen, or could you see all the individuals, and could the court see all the individuals?
Everyone in the room could see the individuals, but basically we were, like, as the press and just generally as the public who were there, we were kind of gagged as to be like, even though you can see and you know the names of the people involved, you are not to like disclose that to anyone else.
Yeah, or anything that could lead to that identification, I imagine. So
yes.
that's the pressure. But so the inquest then runs for five days?
Yes.
In February of this year?
Yes.
And then I don't understand what happens, because then it says that the inquest has been suspended, but the hearing itself was concluded.
The hearing hasn't been concluded because so the inquest was adjourned because one of the main witness, basically, child one, has not given evidence yet, because of the fact that they have not actually done, to the best of my knowledge, they haven't done a test kind of thing to make sure that they're fit to give evidence. And also there were issues with the translation of the mother's evidence on day one of the inquest, whereby the translator that the court actually employed was not doing a good enough job of actually translating the evidence that Zamzam was giving. And so
Zamzam is Shukri's mother.
Yes.
Yeah,
and
okay.
and so there were just they had to bring in another translator to read the transcript, and that would take a couple of weeks to make sure that, and basically we found out that only 40% of her evidence had actually been translated back to the court, and only 40% of it was on the record. And so there was just huge problems in that, which could jeopardize a potential criminal investigation that could happen after the inquest is finished.
And Nemo, do you, so Shukri Abdi's mother spoke in Somali?
Yes.
Do you speak Somali?
Yes, I do. I was the one who flagged it up to the court.
That only a percentage of what she was saying was being translated?
Yes, I didn't know, there was parts of it where I couldn't exactly hear what was being said, but I just knew that even other journalists who didn't speak Somali could tell that there was something wrong with the translation just because of the length of time. Zamzam would give extremely lengthy answers, and then the translator would shorten it significantly, and people would notice that, and there was even a point where the senior coroner had pointed that out as well.
And can you or can we seek under FOI, under Freedom of Information, the transcript versus the tape of what she said? Is it possible to know the difference between what the coroner is hearing and what she's saying?
I think that, I'm not sure, because it's adjourned and it's not concluded. So we might be able to, but if it was adjourned, but I'm not, if it was actually finished, but I'm not sure now what the legal kind of, you know, rules are concerning when the case is actually ongoing.
Okay, Nima, I'm going to stop you for 1 second, because about a year ago, we held a ThinkIn in our newsroom, and happily the lawyer who helped us then is here with us now. Tasneem, are you there? Can I just ask you?
Yes, hello.
Hi there, how are you?
I'm well, yourself?
Yeah, all right. So will you just talk us through the situation that, presumably you've come across this before, this gap between what the coroner or the judge might be hearing and what the...
Yes, well, our government, in its cost-cutting wisdom, a long while ago, had basically given a monopoly to a particular company to provide translator services to the courts and the police generally. Now, what this company did was basically slash the fees that they pay for translators. We've had cases where we were dealing with a Syrian individual who had his own translator, but the local council wouldn't accept that. So they then applied to get a translator from this organization, and the translator they brought was Moroccan, doesn't even speak Arabic, it's Berber. And so we have this general problem across the board. So we often, sorry, Ms. Omar Nemo, you've highlighted an issue that we come across quite often, where it's family members who then raise this issue to say, well, actually, that's not what that person quite said. And often it's as obvious as somebody's spoken for a good 30, 40 seconds, and you get a one-word answer from the translator, which is clearly a condensing of whatever was said.
Tasneem, can you just see, because you in the chat you said the transcript is available from Mayoral Legal Solutions.
Yes.
Who are Mayoral Legal Solutions?
Mayoral Legal Solutions tend to be the organisation that are paid to do the transcripts. So if you want a transcript from the court, you go to Mayoral Legal Solutions, you give them the date, the time of the court, and then they'll quote you an eye-watering figure for the actual transcript itself. So in let's say a 2-week trial, where the transcripts available for that is roughly £40,000 for the transcript.
Oh my God!
So
and does that, because in this case Nemo was in a coroner's court, does that apply to coroner's courts too?
I'm not sure if the coroner's courts are covered by the same organisation that deal with the Crown courts. It could be different. I suspect they're all one and the same. Given what Nemo's just described, then it's probably going to be the same outfit. All right,
Tasneem, I'm gonna Tasneem, can I come back to you in a bit, because I'd like to just round up some of these things and see what you make of them. But let's get Nemo to the end of the sort of the inquest process so far. So you get to the end of day 5, and it's not suspended for COVID reasons, because this is late February, right? So what happened?
So the court was adjourned because basically they'd only kind of they thought that it was going to only take 5 days, and it technically should have. There were issues on the Thursday, so the 4th day in the week, where basically the entire day was rendered pointless. Everyone kind of went to court and then had to go home at about midday, because there were just various issues that just came up, and there was an entire day of court where like it just kind of went out of the window. And so there was a massive time gap that like that couldn't be filled. And then they realized that they weren't going to get through everything by the Friday, and the senior coroner had actually basically tried to create a timetable with the lawyers and everyone in the room, and nobody was free within the next 3 months at the same time for a few days. And it was a lot. Everyone was just in the room, and they were talking about when can we next do this, and people were saying August, people were saying September, and it seemed like it was going to be indefinitely delayed. And then coronavirus happened, and it just exacerbated it.
Right. I mean, I'm struck by one thing, which is, of course, we've been doing some family courts reporting, a lot of family courts reporting over the years, and one of the issues is also about the treatment of children in the court, and the anguish, stress, worse, that accompanies being being questioned in court. Just in your experience, without naming the individuals, were there issues that you felt were about the questioning of the children that had been alongside Shukri Abdi in court that are worth considering here?
What do you mean? Sorry, could you just like?
So one of the big issues. I mean, to be totally blunt, Nemo, is one of the issues in the for example, in the Rotherham and Rochdale child grooming cases, were that kids were being, in this case, these were kids who were themselves, who had been subject to sometimes terrible physical and sexual abuse, were then being asked to sit in court for not just hours, but days and cross-questioned. And so one of the difficulties here, one of the ones that I'm sensitive to, is that we're trying to understand what happened to Shukri Abdi, but obviously there are other children involved here and how that process and experience has impacted them. And having been in court, I just wondered whether, and I'm asking you to say something impressionistic, but what your read was of the process of questioning those children.
So it was really, I just, sad is the first word that comes to mind. So we watched, first of all, the evidence that they gave to police days after Shukri had died, and then afterwards they would be kind of live streamed in from another building, and we would kind of watch as the senior coroner would ask questions, and then their lawyers would kind of like relay back to them the questions and stuff like that. And it was, I think that there definitely were issues that came up whereby one of the children ended up coming, like they were supposed to speak on one day and then they were there for the whole day, and then that didn't even end up happening and they had to come up another day and kind of obviously detail, like you know, tell everyone what happened in excruciating detail, and it was very upsetting to them. And it was just at points they just were very clearly traumatized, and
right.
There were times where I felt like things could have been done to make it a little bit easier for them.
Right. So then the case is suspended, right, with no fixed date. And so did you feel at that stage, and am I right in thinking there's still no fixed date for the return of the inquest?
To the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been a new date that has been set.
And did you feel, or do you understand that Shukri Abdi's family or lawyers feel as though there's a lack of institutional urgency around this?
Absolutely. I think that was the thing that has kind of anchored this whole case from the very beginning to now.
We're frozen again,
This
Jane.
is one of these procedurals where just at the moment you get a little further, you have to pause. I'm going to Tasneem, I just want to come back to you if I might, though. Can I just ask you a few things? One is, tragic incident, does that mean anything, or is it just a formula of words intended not to mean anything? By the way,
it doesn't mean anything. What it doesn't mean, it sort of means that an investigation may be ongoing. Whereas if they were to say it's an accident, that's a conclusion, and therefore there's nothing more to really investigate. Right. Whereas if you say it's an incident, then that's something that means that the door is still open to further investigation. I need to sort of put cards on the table. I think the Shukri's family contacted me around that time as well. Right. Okay. So I had a certain amount of involvement with formulation of press statements and things. At the very early stages, but
so Tasneem, will you? I'm going to go back to Nemo in a second. Then, will you tell us? I should have introduced Tasneem. When I said that he'd come to our newsroom, it was when we were trying to understand the Home Office. At that point, the Home Secretary was Sajid Javid, if I remember rightly, and so Home Office's case against Shamima Begum, and Tasneem was acting on behalf, if I remember rightly, Tasneem, of the family of Shamima Begum.
That's right, yeah.
So I wasn't aware of the fact that you'd been contacted by Shukri Abdi's family, but before I sort of keep taking Nemo sort of painfully through this, what's your read on the institutional response to it?
It was fairly clearly a cover-up, to be honest, from the very early onset. That particular school is horrific. It's got a horrific track record. There's
of what?
Oh, just general racism, bullying. It's absolutely in need of attention, let's say, and it's been in need of attention for at least the last 15 years.
Right.
I think with respect to how the school dealt with it, it's in a very similar way to how they dealt with the Syrian refugee boy in Kirklees, really.
This is the
Jamal.
Jamal Hijazi story.
Yeah, which is just make it go away. There's no issue here, nothing to see here. Something then tragic happens, and thankfully in Jamal's case, nothing as tragic as in Shukri's, but then it's all about closing ranks. So I think in terms of what would be helpful is if subject access requests from the families, this is something I suggested to the family early on, are made regarding any incidents at school. So to see how long this sort of bullying had gone on. The issues to do with who's doing the bullying will be redacted, but that will then eventually come out in a police investigation. So,
and Tazim, sorry. So how does a subject access request work?
So a subject access request, it comes under the Data Protection Act 1998 and now under the GDPR rules, where any individual or institution that holds data about somebody has to cough that up if you simply make a request for it. Now, as this is a child, then their parents would have the ability to make that request, and they would simply fill out a form of words, a letter to say, under the Data Protection Act, we would like all the records to do with our child whilst they were in your care. That would cover emails, that would cover school records, any incidents of bullying, anything like that. And then make the same sort of request from the local council as well. So if any matters were referred up to the council level, that could be due to prevent. If there's racist bullying, then sometimes the duty of prevent would then activate, and they would have had to notify a prevent officer, and then you'd follow the chain to see if actually anything took place or was action beyond that. The problem with councils up in the north is that they lost roughly 100 million each over a period of 5 years under austerity. So these a lot of the administration around safeguarding got centralized to major cities, far away from the schools that they're supposed to be looking after. So a lot of things are lost in administrative A, move, and B, overload.
And just one thing, we don't have anyone from Broad Oak, now Hazelwood, I think, school here to sort of defend themselves or make their case. So when you assert that they've had a history of racism and of bullying, is that because it sits in Ofsted reports or it sits in previous cases?
I think there was, I looked at some Ofsted reports, they didn't specifically mention bullying, but they talked about, I think, intervention at one point, which shows how low the school had dropped.
Right.
I also have other clients, just purely out of luck, as luck would have it, who are now adults, but went to that school and told me that their experience at that school was not dissimilar to Shukri's experience, and that being 15, 20 years ago.
Right. Do you, Nemo, do you know why the school, let's come to this next element, which is the school itself. Do you know why the school changed its, I mean, it seems like one innocuous name from Broad Oak to Hazelwood. Do you know why it changed?
Obviously, the school hasn't responded to me, and so basically, to the best of my knowledge, it literally they changed it very quickly after Shukri Abdi's death, and it seemed like they were trying to distance themselves as far away as they could from the case and from everything, all the allegations that were being brought to them. And on top of that, it seemed like I think they turned into an academy. I think they went from a comprehensive to an academy. Yeah. And
I'm just noticed, that one of the questions that remains now is that the inquest has ended. Of the children that accompanied Shukri Abdi to the river, so far 3 of them have been interviewed in the coroner's court. Is that right?
Yes.
So in effect, 2 still remain to be interviewed.
One of them wasn't interviewed live. One of them, it was we were just kind of, there was 4 children with her. There was a 5th child that wasn't actually at the scene, but they were kind of giving evidence to something that had happened that day at school. So 3 of the children had given evidence, and one of them, which would have been the main witness, is yet to give evidence.
Right. So we have, so I understand, because they say they're children, 5 children, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Mm-hmm.
And so 2 of the children, or I see, so 4 of the children accompanied and 1 is explaining what happened in the course of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Can we sort of step back if we can? I wanted to bring in Lauren for a moment. And Lauren, as you can see, we're all trying to sort of step through this, respecting the, anonymity of the children concerned, but then actually also trying to weigh in on the responsibility of the school and the environment of the school. Because if I read Nemo's, piece for Galdem correctly, one of the things that that Zamzam Shukri's mother asserts, it's that that her daughter being bullied at school. So how do we get to the bottom of or understand what's happened in the school, and how should the school be responding to this?
So the first point is there is no statutory duty for schools to record bullying incidents. Under the Labour government, it went through a consultation as to whether they should have to record and report up to the local authority, but there's currently not a statutory duty. So it's good practice under Ofsted for them to record bullying incidents. And Ofsted, when they come in and inspect, will look to see that they have some kind of reporting mechanism, but it's not statutory and schools aren't told how to do it. So what we see is a completely random approach by schools as to how they choose to record bullying incidents. And there's been a good comment in the chat around, if they're not prepared to recognise it in the first place, what's the likelihood of them to having recorded it? And so Kidscape as a charity are very concerned around the recording of incidents, around how that process works. If it's for the school to decide whether or not something is a bullying incident, that is going to bias the data anyway. So I think that's the first point to make. And that applies to all sorts of things. That applies to children who are absent from school. There's not a category for bullying for school absence. And so it's actually very difficult to know how many children are absent because of bullying. There's not a category when it comes to managed moves in term. So again, there's a general serious lack of accountability when it comes to knowing what's happening with regard to bullying in schools. The school is under a legal duty to prevent all forms of bullying and harassment. They're also under the Equality Act to eliminate discrimination and harassment. And under the Children's Act, if a child is at risk of suffering or likely to suffer significant harm, it's also a child protection concern. In keeping children safe in education, bullying is listed under peer-to-peer abuse, where it's very clear that serious bullying needs to be considered as a safeguarding issue. But what we see in terms of our practice, we work with lots of children and families who are going through serious bullying, including having been victim to serious physical assault, and I could give lots of examples of that, including children who have been in A&E. One example, primary school age girl who went to A&E 5 times over physical attack in school, and at no point was that raised with Children's Services. Right. So the real issue from our perspective as to how serious physical attack is taken in schools. If that had happened to her in the home, it would have been referred to Children's Services. So we're concerned that it's either not being reported, or when it is reported, and again I can speak from experience, where we've had concerns that children are at risk of significant harm, when we've taken that to Children's Services teams, it very, very rarely meets their threshold. Although we can talk about peer-to-peer abuse, the reality is we really struggle to see them taking that seriously. If we really push, they might send an early intervention assessment, right, look at what's going on. But I can also say we've had cases where the police have been very frustrated and have been pushing for more action with regard to the school. Right. And so it's a very mixed picture out there in terms of what's happening.
And Lauren, can you just explain a little bit about it? Because so when you talk about peer-to-peer abuse, how much of this, well, let me just see if I can get this right. So what you're essentially saying is schools do have a legal requirement to seek to prevent abuse, right, and bullying, but they don't have a legal requirement to report it. Is that right? That's
exactly right. There's not a legal requirement for them to record or report bullying at the current time.
And then the peer-to-peer abuse point, is what you're saying that there's a, if you like, a sentiment that underpins this, which is, yes, there may be peer-to-peer abuse, and yes, we are required to prevent it, but there's an element of, you know, kids will be kids, and we don't want to play in the authorities in what is, you know, yes, nasty and unpleasant and unwanted, but matters are only going to be made worse if we call in children's services or the police. I.e., there's a culture that protects the perpetrators.
I wonder whether it's so much about protecting the perpetrators as protecting the reputation of the school. In my experience, quite often children who are perpetrators of these very serious incidents have also got real issues going on for themselves and are also in need of work and in need of protection. But what we tend to see is there's a cover-up because of the reputation of the school. The school are fearful for themselves, not around what's going to happen to the children.
Oh, I see. And then can you just explain one other thing, Lauren? Sorry to interrupt you, but on racism, right? You talk about bullying. What are schools' requirements on reporting incidents of racism, hate speech, incitement to violence?
Well, after the Macpherson report, there was for a time a legal requirement for schools to report racist incidents into the local authority, but that rather quietly went by the wayside. So you will have some schools who will still report racist incidents and others who won't. And the reality is the majority of schools won't report them in and are not under a requirement to report those in. So again, we don't actually know what's happening. That's the reality. Right.
Nemo, Lauren, I'm going to come back to you on this. I'm ashamed at how little I know or understand, you know, just in explaining that. But Nemo, let's just talk about sort of Broad Oak, now Hazelwood. What's your experience been of communication and explanation by the school of what happened here?
So the school has been, really hard to kind of contact. It wasn't a big part of my initial investigation, my initial article, because I was kind of trying to focus on who Shukri was in the inquest itself. But the school has generally to the media been incredibly not forthcoming in trying to give explanations. They said that they were going to do some kind of investigation as soon as it happened, but nothing really came of it. There was no reports that were done. There was nothing that was actually done materially to kind of address this massive tragedy that had happened among students at their school, and they don't want to cooperate. And I think it is a very big case of the institutions wanting to kind of preserve their reputation more than anything else, especially since they've been in the media before with a teacher who had committed suicide a few years earlier because of bullying in the school. And there were various incidents at that school where they'd become kind of notorious in the community.
And as I understand it, what's happened is that Andy Burnham. Well, tell us what the role of sort of Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, has been in this.
Up until very recently, he didn't have a role in this. There was very little. I don't think he made a comment when this first happened, or if he did, I must have missed it. There had been very, very little response from, the local council, central kind of the kind of governance bodies in Manchester about anything that had happened. There was very little from Bury Council. There's very little from any, there was just no response until very recently when Shukri's case started trending again on social media, and there was a kind of re-emergent kind of flame under the case where a lot of people were directly contacting Andy Burnham to make a statement, in which he did.
Yeah, and Nemo, can I ask you, I'm trying to understand that some of the thinking that may be taking place in the school, which is, it's terrible and tragic that Shukri Abdi died, and there are now a number of children who knew her, were in her class, and the school feeling protective of them, right, and trying to prevent what's already a tragedy engulfing more people and being itself captured by part of a political movement following the murder of George Floyd, and a certain defensiveness or protectiveness of those children. Do you think there's an element of that here, or how do you explain the institutional response of the school?
I think that if that were the case, they perhaps should have stated that clearly. And if that's what they were trying to achieve by kind of effectively staying silent and not really responding to people asking them very legitimate questions, as they are a public institution.
Sorry, Nemo, I think you've frozen again. I'm hoping you're going to reappear in a moment. But what I'm going to do, if I might, is just while you unfreeze, unmute Nemo. Kerry, Thomas, are you there? Is Kerry there?
I'm here, yeah.
Kerry, hi there. Just because you said that there was, sorry, this is my colleague, fellow editor that taught us, Kerry Thomas. So Kerry, you said that there was a case, sorry, that I should probably know about that's very similar in Wales.
Yeah, and forgive me, I don't know chapter and verse on this, but it's so strikingly similar that it's worth just paying attention to. So it's the case of Christopher Capetta, who died, I think, just a few days after Shukri Abdi. So Christopher was 13. His mother came to the UK from the DRC. I think Christopher was born in London. They moved to a place called Mountain Ash in the Welsh Valley. So this is not unlike Bury, actually, a sort of post-industrial, quite a tough little place. And at the beginning of July last year, Christopher, who was football mad, had gone out with some friends after school. And the next thing his mother heard was that he had jumped off a bridge into the River Cunnan, which is one of the river that flows through the town, and had tragically drowned. Like Shukri, he didn't swim either, so there was not a great deal of sense to the idea that he would have jumped off the bridge. Police, I think, interviewed 4 people who were with him at the time. His mother, I think, thinks there were up to 14 people present, and the rest have not been interviewed. And like in Shukri Abdi's case, there is a campaign ongoing to try to reopen that case, because it seems another instance where the authorities have jumped to a conclusion and accepted the first thing they were told. And actually, I think, again, I can see Nemo nodding, so she may know more about this than I do. I think there's already been a substantial change in that it was Christopher's sports coach who called his mum to say that he jumped off the bridge. But I think the CPS has since accepted that he may have been pushed off, but that they don't believe the pushing was itself malicious. So that's, Nima, you may want to jump back in and tell me what I missed out there.
So I unfortunately don't know loads about the case, but I do know, I remember having to read up on it because I obviously was at the inquest, and I was, and my editor kind of sent the case for me to read up on. And basically it was so strikingly similar and happened so close in time to Shukri's case that I thought it was really interesting in terms of, there is this thing of like black children and not being able to swim, and them ending up in these really precarious circumstances. And like, I can't swim, for example, none of my siblings can swim. I think it's a thing. And the fact that both of these children, both 12, 13 parents, had immigrated to this country, and who hadn't had a history, and this isn't to suggest that what had happened was malicious, like you had said, because I don't actually believe that what happened to Shukri was malicious either, but the fact that they had ended up in these situations, and the fact that the institutional response has been to effectively bury their heads, kind of shows a continual response of like negligence and, not looking after the people they need to look after.
Tasneem, can I come back to you at this point? Because I suppose, what Nemo just said there, you were in the court and you've heard the proceedings so far, and as obviously they're ongoing, so we can't, presume their outcome. But the fact that you're saying you're not suspecting, Nemo, that this was malicious. The reason why I think this case causes such concern, as well as being the tragic death of a 12-year-old, is that the seeming sort of procedural nature of the response, and the way in which it doesn't seem to have a sense of urgency in the institutions that have responded to it. And I guess this is my question, Tasneem. You've done lots and lots of these cases, and when we saw what happened to George Floyd, and the world sort of became incredibly animated by the Black Lives Matter movement. It was also a moment to ask ourselves, how does racism work in the UK? And I wonder what conclusions you draw from what you hear and what you've seen in this case, because obviously racism does work differently in different institutions and different places. So what do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's it's difficult to tease out between where someone's being racist in a school setting, or there's institutional racism, or whether it's just simply reputational preservation, really, to avoid reputational damage. So, for example, there's the Shamima Begum case, right? Trying to get anything out of the school at all was impossible. The school changed its name not once but twice since that incident in order to avoid any association in the media with it. And then you have, instead of a safe, a serious case review, you have the local council basically putting a block to a serious case review where kids have gone off and joined ISIS and died. So you've got this cross institution conspiracy to not look at things at all, really.
And Tasneem, just on that, the important point there is presumably that the institution or the schools invoke the need to protect the children in order, in your view, then to defend the reputation of the institution. Is that what you're saying? I don't want to put words into your mouth. I just want to understand why you think that's happened.
Well, partly, but not so much, because the kids are going to be tweeting and Snapchatting about it all day long. So the issue isn't that; it's that they are trying to cover the fact that a horrific incident took place. It often isn't an incident that took place in a vacuum. It's an incident that built up to the final tragedy. And frankly speaking, the schools had a duty to safeguard any children involved in that. In the Shamima Begum case, it is radicalization. In the Jamal Hijazi case, it is radicalization and also simple safeguarding around bullying. Now, in the Hijazi case, individuals who are involved in bullying him were referred to Prevent for being right-wing extremists, but nothing happened there, basically. So again, that school changing its name, looking to be intervened into, and all the upper echelon of teachers have left. They've gone on to other places. So what you find is a institutionally identical response to any issue to do with children where there's a tragedy, regardless of whether it's a death, losing to radicalization, or a horrific bullying incident. It's an institutional reaction that is problematic. Now, in terms of the police, when you're dealing with children, that's really difficult. The police have to think about taking a matter to court, and that means the balance of evidence, really. And when you're dealing with bullying, you've got a cabal of people who have isolated an individual child, and they're going to all cut up their story so it looks like the child who's being bullied is actually the problem child, really. So in terms of looking at that evidentially, well, when you take all the statements from all the victims or the perpetrators, they all happen to be victims, and there's going to be very little evidence around them that's going to be able to displace that, really. It's just their say-so. Right. Now, there's questions around, you then referred back to the school sort of thing. So the perpetrators will say one thing, they're the victim, or we're all friends. You then have to go back to the school to check the records to see, well, actually, were there incidents of bullying by these self-same people, and does that then make their statements a lie or likely to be a lie? And that exercise simply isn't happening, either through the fact that the school doesn't record things, or that they have recorded things, but they're trying to safeguard the other children who are involved. Bullying doesn't happen with a hard cabal. It happens with a whole umbra and penumbra of friends who may then be affected as well.
Lauren, before I just sort of give Nima the last word, can you just pick up on this, and particularly, I suppose, two things. One is, as you may have seen, there's a conversation in the chat too about schools that rename themselves. I was completely unaware of this. Has this been a trend that you've seen too, schools renaming themselves to move away from, a reputational issue? And specifically, will you just address the issue of Ofsted? I would have thought that Ofsted would be leaning into definitely bullying and definitely racism, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
Ofsted are leaning into bullying. One of the problems was, for a while, to be outstanding, you had to show that you had low levels of recorded bullying. So over the last year, a group of us campaigned around that to say that's actually really unhelpful, because it deters schools from recording bullying. What we need schools to show is that they acknowledge bullying happens and to evidence the action they take to both prevent and respond to bullying. And we have won that battle with Ofsted, so that change has now happened.
In Lauren, you're saying just in the last year?
Yes, so Ofsted updated their guidance, so now they are looking for schools who are doing exactly that. But I think another challenge that we've not touched on is parental complaints processes. We would certainly call for independent advocacy for parents, carers and children, because this is for another day, but the parent complaints process in this country is completely defunct. And so you can complain to Ofsted, you can raise a safeguarding issue with Ofsted, has been reflected in the chat, but most parents don't know about that and wouldn't even know where to begin. You can take a complaint straight to the Department for Education, and it can trigger a safeguarding referral. I know that from things that we've dealt with. But again, there's a real lack of transparency actually around any of those processes. So things are very much against the parent and the child in these cases. And what we need is independent advocacy and much more transparency for parents.
Nemo, why don't you just tell us, so where does it go? So what happens next? Where does this thing go from here?
So the next immediate steps in terms of the actual inquest is literally just waiting on the senior coroner to set a new date, which I don't think will happen for a while. And basically, from what like the family and the lawyers have basically said, is that the next pieces of evidence that are to come out whenever the inquest is set to happen again are the most crucial parts of the case. It is kind of the make or break part of the inquest, and it would be really important for like everyone to have their eyes on that and to see what the ruling is, and to make sure that it is a just one. I think that there has been all of this stuff that has been happening with Black Lives Matter has, I think, reinstated an urgency in this case. And in a lot of cases, I think people are actually finding more and more cases that seem to be appearing every single day on social media, of cases like Shukri Abdi's, where people have been abjectly failed by the system, by institutions, by places that were supposed to kind of keep them safe. And it's just one of the most haunting things when Zamzam has basically said that she fled violence and war to try and, you know, keep her family safe, and then her daughter dies only a few miles away from their house in Bury. So yeah, I think there's just an institutional problem here that really needs to be addressed. I think that's where everyone should be looking.
Right. Well, we're coming towards the end of it, and so this is one of those thinkings where sometimes we have a debate about a big set of issues, and if you like, try and thread through it a point of view. Actually, this is a starting point rather than a point to reach any conclusions. I would say this, you know, what we're trying to do here is the opposite of what most newsrooms do, which is open the investigative process up before we publish the full story. We know it's very hard in these things to get to the finished article, but what we'd like to do is get to one that's better informed by a greater group of people. So if you've got a point of view, a link, a perspective, please do let me know. It's always easy to get hold of me. I'm james@tortoisemedia.com. I know Nemo's working on this, and so I'm sure would appreciate any thoughts you would have too. And then there are obviously some practical things that we can take from this. Lauren, thank you very much. We will definitely look at that gulf between, you know, the requirement to prevent bullying and but no reporting requirement. We're going to follow up on the discussions that it seems that Kerry, Tasneem, Lauren, Nemo, you've all had, which is, you know, this issue about the naming and the renaming, and in some cases the renaming again of schools. We'll look more closely into the parental complaints process, and we will definitely look specifically at the Broad Oak Hazelwood case, the Greater Manchester Police, and the behaviour of the Coroner's Court, and come back to the politics of it with Andy Burnham. There's clearly a question about translation in courts. And so we'll look at this Mayoral Legal Solutions point, Tasneem, both what they provide, but also the price of it, which is absolutely extraordinary, and the searches at the school for any references to Shukri. I'm sure we'll pursue all of those elements. So I hope that the process here that we're going through is open, and I hope it'll be better informed as a result. For now, though, and for this evening, a big thank you to everyone for joining. A big thank you to you, Lauren, for giving us a context, but a particular thank you to you, Nemo. It was really, you know, we haven't always had to do this, go through it all step by step, but it's been really illuminating and hugely helpful despite all of our technical difficulties. So thank you very much to everyone for joining. Have a very good evening.